You know, when Americans say that democracy is an important part of American foreign policy, it's never the only point of American foreign policy. We also need, stable access to oil. We need allies in fighting terrorism. We support Israel and other allies in the region. So we're a great power, so we've got other interests besides democracies.
There were a number of agendas. There were agendas from protecting Israel all the way over to freedom and democracy for Iraq. There were some neoconservatives who were so wrapped up in their philosophy that you break an omelet to make an egg, or you break an egg to make an omelet, or you, as one neoconservative put it to me, you need chaos, you need death, you need blood flowing in the streets to bring democracy.
This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control.
The concern that the National Commission on Terrorism had is if you have state sponsors, particularly state sponsors who are developing weapons of mass destruction, and 5 states were so identified in the year 2000 by the Department of State. And if they, for whatever reason, make available weapons of mass destruction to somebody like bin Laden or Al-Qaeda, then you have a nexus that is really frightening, because then you have these guys who may get their hands on nuclear or radiological or biological weapons, which makes it much easier to kill hundreds of thousands.
Powell, nor I don't think there was anyone at the State Department, no one that I knew anyway, who believed bin Laden and Al-Qaeda had anything to do with Iraq. All the intelligence from the CIA, from our own intelligence branch in the State Department, all the intelligence said no, that Saddam Hussein and bin Laden had nothing to do with each other. May have talked at one time, but that corroborated our feeling. They didn't like each other at all. The first time that Powell was perhaps disabused of that thought was when George Tenet brought into the DCI conference room, the conference room out at the CIA, where we were getting Powell ready for the 5 February 2003 presentation at the UN Security Council. George Tenet brought breathlessly into the room evidence that a high-level Al-Qaeda operative had just been interrogated and revealed substantial contacts between Baghdad and Al-Qaeda. This is the first time that Powell and I had heard this. He said, to effect, I don't want to do this. I can't go to New York and deliver this tripe. He said crap or shit. I mean, something like that. You're the person in charge of this. Do you feel like this is significant stuff? I mean, it doesn't seem like it to me. It seems like it's being contrived. It's being made up.
Let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia, and we went to work. Get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated. They lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there's a very strong argument, which is, it wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow, because we will harvest. So we then left Pakistan. We said, okay, fine, you deal with the stingers that we've left all over your country. You deal.
One of the reasons we were attacked is because we, and Osama bin Laden said, because we have troops in Saudi Arabia.
That's right, and he wasn't the only one. Wolfowitz, Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, in an interview in May 2003, said that the great thing about getting troops out of Saudi Arabia was that it's been a huge recruiting device for Al-Qaeda. That's a quote. So in other words, Wolfowitz admits one of Ron Paul's main points, and Wolfowitz is one of the neoconservatives who pushed for the war in Iraq.
Isn't it one of the reasons they attack, that people attack us? We have troops in their country?
First of all, the issue of why 3,000 Americans got killed has little to do with Saudi Arabia and everything to do with Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. We need it because of our positions in the world. But
Why?
Pardon?
Why can't they defend themselves?
First of all, with some of them are training. Some of them are like with the South Korean, because of what happened in North Korea. So we would be involved. I mean, we don't want to have to deploy back over there because North Koreans are so belligerent.
South Korea's gross domestic product is 40 times that of North Korea. They can defend themselves. You're making a good point that there's a treaty. You can end treaties. Treaties can be ended. And in fact, the South Korean president, when Bush was in office, asked if we could finally end the war.
I have, as Paul says, cut them, bring them all home.
Okay.
That's my problem.
All right, what point? Okay,
Second point. He says cut foreign aid. Cut it to Israel, cut it to Egypt. What's wrong with that? Cut it to everyone to zero. Cut it to everyone to zero.
How do Israel, first of all, won't exist. And
why wouldn't they exist?
Because we have a phenomenal amount of billions of dollars to Israel, is helping them stay in.
$3 billion a year. It's 1.5% of their gross domestic product.
The U.S. government funding and training and intelligence work is essential, that, according to the Israelis and to others, that they exist. Paul would say, stop it. I think it's.
He does say stop, but he would also stop it to Egypt and Jordan,
right?
And it would be even.
He wants everybody. See, Congressman Paul wants everyone, everything stopped, and that's my issue with him. Yeah. It's not a reasonable approach to anything.
Okay, but the point is the Israelis are going to say they want the aid because people who get things for free want those things. That doesn't mean that without it they would not survive. There's a sustained case for non-intervention that many political scientists, some economists have made, and it's a very strong case.
How do you make that case, for example, 9/11? How do you make the case for not responding?
Ron Paul says we should have attacked them after 9/11. That was a reason to retaliate.
Part of the upset that led to 9/11 was U.S. foreign policy. If you stick your hand in hornets' nests, hornets are going to bite.
You also can't, but you can't sit in your house and wait for the hornets to attack to keep that dangerous world. How it got there can be argued, but we are in the middle of a war on very, very bad guys, and you have to have some idea what they're doing. From my standpoint, we have to actually be doing more, not less. You can't dig a hole and bury yourself in it, which is what the congressman wants.
How many wars do you want to have in your lifetime? How many bombs are you going to drop? Looks like we've become a warrior nation. We bombed Grenada. Grenada. We are dropping bombs on crowded cities at night where old people and children are sleeping. And we're watching it on CNN. And the only voice that's spoken up at all in this campaign about this is Ron Paul. Why are we so interventionist, he wants to know? What are we doing with all these wars? How are we safer? These are very common sense observations, and no other candidate can possibly speak those words. It would be, they believe, politically fatal. Now think about it. You know, this is not the country that my parents raised me to pledge my allegiance to. You know, you can't say you're a proud American and then waterboard somebody. You can't say you're a proud American and assassinate an American citizen in another country.
And I think it's an impressive thing to say, is he supports the Constitution.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
And for that, people call him crazy. And I'm like, watching this from the sidelines. I don't have a horse in the race. I'm
Isn't
British.
that amazing?
And I'm like, here's a guy who basically repeatedly says, I support the Constitution. And he's the one everyone calls cranky.
Mm-hmm. Yes, everything is turned upside down here. So Ron Paul's concern about our adventurism is, in Newt Gingrich's word, dangerous.
What does this mean? Did you know there are more than 200,000 American military sites around the world? Many in vital areas of interest. That's right, 202,178 American military sites on Earth. South Korea, the Mideast. Did you know there are also, though, assets in Aruba and the Bahamas? Do we need them all? We're bringing in two big military guns to weigh in. Spider Marks is the former commanding general of the U.S. Army Intelligence Center. Retired Admiral Joe Sestak commanded an aircraft carrier group. Good to have both of you with us. That number is truly stunning. 202,000+ military sites around the world. Admiral Sestak, can we afford to slash some of them?
Absolutely. A number of them are still legacy from the Cold War, particularly in the European theater.
General Marks, when you look at that headline out of The Independent, though, it makes you realize that the rest of the world, there will be many who see this as America the weaker, America that cannot fight battles anymore. Is there any truth in that interpretation?
There's absolutely zero truth to that. Well, how somebody wants to interpret it is clearly up to them, but there's no underlying truth to that at all.
Both parties are beholden to the Israelis. Netanyahu's government obviously seems to want war, despite their public words. The military vendors, as you were talking to Mr. Williams, clearly want war. And, listen to Mr. Crystal and Mr. Krauthammer. They're dying for war. We're surrounded by people who want war in Iran. They want war in Syria. They had their little war in Libya. And the Congress has never voted on any of these things. Dr. Paul is not in the business of saving the world. He sees very clearly that the founders intended the president to be concerned with enforcing laws in the United States for the best interests of Americans. You also could go to bed every night assured, if Dr. Paul was the president, that there would be no war in the morning because the president decided it was a neat thing to do, as he did in Libya, as they're going to do in Iran, because Dr. Paul would go to the Congress and ask for a declaration of war, as the founders intended, Judge. People are afraid of him because this endless war process that we're engaged in would come to a screeching halt. The Israelis and the Mossad do whatever they want to do, using American cover. They really don't care about U.S. interests because they know they have so many people in this country who will protect them. If the president says no and he won't let them do it, the Israelis will go to their various operatives in the Congress, and the Congress will put pressure on the president to do it. And, who's going to raise it? The New York Times and the Washington Post are not going to make a big to-do about this because they're beholden to the Israelis.
Anyone that suggests that Iran is not a threat to this country or is not a threat to stability in the Middle East is obviously not seeing the world very clearly. He sees it exactly the way that Barack Obama sees it, that we have to go around and apologize for the fact that we've gone out and exerted our influence to create freedom around the world. I don't apologize for that. I don't apologize for the Iranian people being free for a long time, and now they're under a malacracy that tramples the rights of women, tramples the rights of gays, tramples the rights of people all throughout their society, and is the greatest supporter of terrorism in the Middle East and around the world, and is setting up training camps and is working with Venezuela and other countries in south of our border to threaten us. Iran is a country that must be confronted. I was in front of this curve. I authored the Iran Freedom Support Act back in 2004. It was blocked by Joe Biden, nonetheless, and Barack Obama once. We got it passed, and I can tell you, if Rick Santorum and when Rick Santorum is president, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon because the world as we know it will be no more.
Congressman Paul, 30 seconds.
You've heard the war propaganda that is liable to lead us into the sixth war, and I worry about that position. Iran is a threat because they have some militants there. But believe me, they're all around the world, and they're all around the world, and they're not a whole lot different than others. Iran does not have an air force that can come here. They can't even make enough gasoline for themselves. And here we are building this case out, please. They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they had nuclear weapons, and we had to go in. I'm sure you supported that war as well. Okay. It's time we quit this. It's time. It's trillions of dollars we're spending on these wars.